Pushkin.
Billy Bragg came up in East London, Barking, Essex to be exact, which is fitting given the characteristic howl of his vocals. Listening to him these days, it's hard not to recall the late great Joe Strummer or the modern brilliance of Archy Marshall, a.k.a. King Krule. But Bragg's musical output stands apart from and above comparison. In the mid-'80s, an era driven by production, he was all about songs and was one of the great standard bearers of political music carried on from both the folk and punk traditions. In his conversation with Bruce Headlam, Bragg talks about music as a political tool and whether it can truly affect change. Reminisces about his first trip to the U.S. in '84, opening for Echo and the Bunnymen, and his collaboration with Wilco to bring unpublished Woody Guthrie songs to life. This is Broken Record, liner notes for the digital age. I'm Justin Richmond. Here's Bruce Headlam in conversation with Billy Bragg.
You're touring right now.
I am, yeah. I'm basically doing a week of shows before Newport Folk Festival. Mm-hmm. That's what this trip's about. And then I'm coming back in the autumn, late September, early October, and starting in Vancouver, down the West Coast, up through the Midwest, over to the East Coast, and down to finishing off in Washington, D.C., a full month on tour. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of 40th anniversary tour, because it's 40 years ago next month that I first came to America to open for Echo and the Bunnymen.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How was it this time compared to 40 years ago?
You got to remember, I'm someone who'd never been on a plane before I got this job. I was 25 years old. And we come across the Atlantic, and I'm on the left-hand side of the plane. So it's coming to JFK. So we come down Long Island. You can't really see anything apart from ocean. And then it starts banking to, coming to JFK, and I start to see America, and I see these, rows of houses, and I'm like, okay, this is amazing. So coming in yesterday, I was same side of the plane, and we come through the clouds, and as the plane banked, I'm not a happy flyer, so I listen to music when I'm not watching films, particularly landing and takeoff. And it's just on random, it just goes through. If I don't like the track, I'll just bang forward till I find something like a Scarborough Fair come on by Simon and Garfunkel. And as it did, the plane banked exactly the same way. And I looked down, I thought, I'm getting a tingle talking about it now. Thinking back to that first time we came to the United States of America in August of 1984. It was sweltering hot, and the Olympics were on. The LA Olympics, I think. And we stayed in the Iroquois Hotel in Midtown. And I had 4 or 5 nights performing on the roof of the Danceteria, which was an amazing introduction to life in America, not least because looking uptown from the Danceteria, from where I was standing on the stage, the vista was absolutely dominated by the Empire State Building, which lit up as the sun went down, the lights on it. It was like, okay, this is it. This is America. Here we are. Let's do this. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm very happy memories of touring with Echo and the Bunnymen in 1984, because I stayed on the bus. Well, the Bunnymen were on the bus the first half, and then they got bored and started flying. But me and my best friend from school, Wiggy, came with me. And we stayed on the tour bus, and we, as a result, saw a lot more of America than if we'd just seen the airports and the hotels.
What stands out from that, from traveling around in a bus?
We did a show in Chicago, and we went to sleep on the bus. And when we woke up, I was like, okay, I wonder where we are now. So I went up and sat next to the driver, and I said, where are we now, man? And he said, we're in Illinois. I said, no, where are we now? He said, yeah, we're in Illinois. I said, no, we started in Illinois, in Chicago. Where are we at the moment? And he's like, we're still in Illinois. I'm like, how can we be in Illinois? I've been driving for 12 hours. He looked at me like, you don't know half of it, son. So yeah, the vastness of America, that was one.
Well, I hope you stuck with it, because once you hit St. Louis, there's a little bit of a hill.
Yeah, there's that as well. And the other one was, we realized in that drive was Chicago to New Orleans, non-stop drive. So we realized he would have to stop somewhere. Somewhere he's going to have to stop. I said to him, where are you going to stop? He said, I don't know, somewhere around Memphis. I was like, oh, interesting. Any chance you could stop at Graceland's? And he's like, no, I'm not going into Memphis. It's a total, nightmare driving in and out of Memphis. Forget it. It will just be a truck stop somewhere. You'll be fine. You'll be able to get a meal and a coffee. And I was like, so I went back with the crew, the lighting crew and the sound crew, and I said, look, there's 9 of us. If we all put $10 in, remember this is 1984 as well. If we all put $10 in, and give him $90, we might be able to bribe him to go asleep for 4 hours in the car park at Gracelands. And I was like, that's got to be worth $10. So we put it together. We made him an offer. He was very grumpy about it, but he did do it. I remember him saying to us, remember where we parked? And so we got that. We actually got to go around Gracelands before Priscilla tidied it up.
Mm-hmm.
So we saw the kind of the depths, the pile of the carpet in the jungle room, the room with all the gold records down the side, and the costumes reminded me of Howard Carter said when he opened Tutankhamun's tomb, everywhere the glint of gold. It was like we would come to see, you know, the Pharaoh, Memphis as well. I mean, that kind of that kind of made it even more like we were coming to see the Boy King. And then when we got to New Orleans, we woke up and the band decided to go to Bourbon Street. So I went with them and we saw this guy playing. I'll think of his, what was his name? I'd never heard of him before or since. Mason Rufner, I think his name was. Mm-hmm. Slick back guy, skinny guy, playing this black Telecaster. Incredible thing. But he did this thing where he went down the notes and the bass string of the Telecaster with his elbow while pointing at the audience like that. I've never seen anything like it. And you got to remember, this is all in one day. This is the day where we woke up still in Illinois. Mm-hmm. So that passage of time where we went from the Great Lakes to the Gulf, you know, I've never done anything like that again. I've traveled, you know, I've done some huge drives. I've done some great journeys. I've been in some amazing situations. But in 24 hours, I don't think I ever did anything as mind-blowing as what we did in that drive from Chicago to New Orleans.
Were you an Elvis fan growing up?
I was, yeah. I mean, I think for my generation, it's hard to get to rock and roll without going through Elvis. I mean, if you think of the cover of London Calling, it's a homage to Elvis's first album, graphically, you know.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many different Elvises. You can choose your Elvis, you know. For some people, it's Sun Records Elvis. I mean, that's why I wanted a lot of echo on my first album, so it sounded like Elvis's Sun Records. But my favourite Elvis is political Elvis. You know, Elvis that, for his Christmas special in 1968, has specially written for him If I Can Dream, and sings it at the end of the Christmas special in front of the big words, Elvis, and looks into the camera and sings this incredible song, which in the wake of 1968, which is the year where Dr. King was assassinated and Bobby Kennedy was assassinated while they were making the Christmas special, while they were filming it, to talk about a dream, you know, having a dream in which our brothers walk hand in hand. I mean, that's pretty brave. That's pretty political. And then he comes out with In the Ghetto and goes through that run of great singles. Briefly, you know, there's a moment there where you might think Elvis could pick up the mantle of the Kennedy brothers and unify America, because he doesn't. He goes to Gracelands and takes loads of amphetamines. But the possibility of that is
interesting.
There. It's a really great moment in pop history as well, and he does it because he specifically asked to do it. Colonel Parker wants him to finish with "I'll Be Home by Christmas," a dreadful, sort of maudlin Christmas song, and he's like, I need something else. So he gets his musical director to come up with this "If I Can Dream," and he really goes for it. If you watch the clip, it's on YouTube.
I'll look at it.
It is.
Even when you said political Elvis, I was like, that's the Elvis I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. If I Can Dream is in its context, it's Elvis connecting with that. I mean, I think he felt Dr. King being assassinated in his town as well. I think he felt that. He really felt that. And that year was such a tumultuous year in the United States. And Elvis had something to say about it.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because even the 68 Elvis for me was almost betraying the sort of Sun Records Elvis I loved so much, you know, rushing through songs, finishing everything with a karate chop or something.
But the thing about Elvis is he's the first one. You know, he doesn't know how to do this. It's like Lonnie Donegan in England, you know. He was the first guy. He wasn't really prepared for what was going to happen to him. He's out there on the ice, taking one step after the other, never knowing when it was going to break. Everyone who came in his wake, including the Beatles, you know, including everybody, have at least had an idea, a model, you know. Why did the Beatles go into films? Because Elvis did. Yeah. Even Lonnie Donegan made a film, you know. That's what they did. They followed his route, but he was just making it up as he was going along. And I think because he shone so brightly, he was ultimately consumed by his own fame, his own image, his own Elvis-ness. There's never been anyone could touch what he did and who he was and what he meant to people. Mm-hmm. And I think for my generation, as I say, if you're going to take on that rock and roll mantle, you can't ignore him.
You know, Paul Simon said when we were talking to him, his favorite record, and he's obsessed with the production of records, is Mystery Train.
Yeah.
And he said every song he's ever done, he tries to get a little of that Mystery Train.
I tell you what, I totally agree with him. For me, that's the key moment when the synthesis of country music and blues, of African-American roots music and European-American roots music comes together is in Mystery Train. They've captured lightning in a bottle there. I mean, obviously that's all right, it's incredible. But there's something about Mystery Train, it just kind of appears over the hill, coming out of nowhere. It's like, it doesn't even seem to have a start. And then it trails off at the end and it's gone. It's really gone, you know? Mm-hmm. And
it's got that incredible slap that's from the studio. There's no drummer on it.
No. I mean, that's the really interesting thing about the Sun Sessions. They're so similar to skiffle in that they have no drums, no augmentation, no pianos or brass or anything like that. You know, it's all just guitar-driven, slap bass, and velocity. It's about speed. You know, he speeds up those old blues songs, those old country songs like Blue Moon of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. He just, you know, revs them up and off they go, which is exactly what Lonnie Donegan was doing with Lead Belly stuff in the UK. Weirdly, almost at the same time. I mean, That's All Right Mama, Elvis's first recording, came the 5th of July, 1954. Lonnie Donegan recorded Rock Island Line a week later on the 13th of July in London. I mean, how that was just out in the air somewhere, something so incendiary could happen at the same time.
Here's the difference to me. This is something I've thought a lot about, which is when you listen to Lonnie Donegan, you listen to a lot of performers. You love what they do, but then you want to go hear the original.
Yeah.
Elvis, you don't do that.
Yeah.
I think maybe he shone so brightly that when you go, you know, for example, when I went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I don't know if you've ever been there, but he is presented as the first rock and roll star.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people who were called rock and roll stars before him, like Big Joe Turner and Ruth Brown, are just considered these sort of the pioneers, as they like to call them. And by the way, Elvis, the Elvis Enterprises owns that part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's presented the way they want. But I thought, well, and you know, you have this little thing like, who do you think should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I thought, well, Arthur Crudup, because he did the original version. And if you hear the original version, it's got a lot of the elements. It's not that totally transformed. And you're like, nobody knows him.
No.
Nobody knows Mabel. Now I've forgotten her name.
Mae Axton.
Pardon me?
Mae Axton.
No, she did the original
Hound Dog.
Hound Dog.
Yeah. I can't think of her name either.
To be fair, written by two Jewish guys from Long Island, but there you go.
Hey.
But there's something about, you know, even, and Malcolm and I did an episode about this once, you know, Little Richard actually was grateful to Pat Boone.
Yeah.
Because people listened to Pat Boone and then wanted to hear Little Richard.
Yeah.
You know, Fats Domino felt the same way. With Elvis, and I don't think it was deliberate on his part.
No.
But...
Well, he's a complete package, though, anyway. He's sexy.
Yeah. There's something about him that he, you know, all evolution before him kind of gets discarded somehow. And he's like...
Well, we know nothing comes from nothing, does it? It happened. These things, you know, that's one of the things that led me to write the book about skiffle, Roots, Radicals and Rockers. I was fed up with the idea that Lonnie Donegan recording Rock Island Line was a singularity that just happened. Mm-hmm. It didn't just happen. It was a load of forces coming together around that time in the UK, culturally, among young people. And I was looking for a book that explained how it happened, and no one had written it, so I ended up writing it myself. And it was that urge to find it out, I think, that really, really helped. I'm really proud that in the book, Rock Island Line doesn't come out until chapter 13.
Mm-hmm. But your book also, it's another chapter in this English fascination with American music. And, you know, as many books as I read about music, or you know, there's that apocryphal story that when Paul McCartney first came to the U.S., he asked an interviewer, well, where's Ray Charles?
Yeah.
The guy said, I don't know where Ray Charles is, because he just assumed in the United States, Ray Charles was as important as they were in England.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange. Like when I first came to New York in 1984, a friend I said, take me to a great record shop. He took me to a great record shop. It was full of Depeche Mode imports. I'm like, mate, this is not a great record shop. I mean, the average mum and pup store in America back then was a great record shop. We had a gospel section. We never had anything like that. We had a Latin section. Had a country section with real proper, obscure stuff that you never find at home. So,
well, what is that in the English? It's famous stuff. It's obscure stuff. The Beatles did an Arthur Alexander song. Who you couldn't find anybody in the streets of New York who remembers Arthur Alexander.
Yeah.
But they do a tribute album, and people in England, Nick Lowe, Graham Parker are lining up to do Arthur Alexander. It's like a cargo cult or something. That
it's really, I think, appreciation of the great performances. Arthur Alexander was a great performer. I'm scratching my head now for the name of the guy who originally recorded at the dark end of the street, something Carr. I can't now. But the people who were around at the time said he was the greatest soul singer of all time. And his performances are great. Yeah. But he just didn't get the profile.
That's what fascinated me about the skiffle. And they were, I hadn't realized, in my mind, skiffle was kind of like almost a kid's version of sort of pop songs, country mainly. And instead, they're really diving into...
They really are diving into African-American roots music to the extent that one old guy who was a skiffler in the 50s told me that the average skiffle player felt they had more in common with an African-American sharecropper that they'd never met any than they did with their own dad, because their parents had lived through the war, and the skiffle kids were the first bunch of youngsters to define themselves as different, and the way they did that was by playing the guitar, because there weren't many guitars in British popular music prior to the mid-1950s, and it's Donegan and then Elvis that kind of brings that in, But it is school kids. I mean, it's like a playground craze. When Lonnie Donegan plays in Liverpool in 1956, George Harrison goes every night. I think he's 13. McCartney's 14, he goes one night, and Lennon, who's 16, don't know if he went, but in the weeks that followed, he formed the Quarrymen. So we are talking about schoolboys. And the reason why that's significant is because by the time they were 21, 22, and 23, those skiffle kids had been playing live music, mostly Chuck Berry rock and roll type music, for 5 or 6 years. They were kind of road hardened. So when the Beatles break America in 1964, there's a whole cadre of British bands ready to follow them. And every single one of those British invasion bands were all skifflers. And I think that didn't happen to white American youth until the folk boom, which is later, 59, 60, until you get to Kingston Trio and acts like that.
Weavers.
Yeah. Well, no. I think the Weavers were earlier. I think the Weavers were earlier. I think they were gone. I mean, the idea of young people playing guitars comes with the folk boom. And that doesn't really get going until the late 50s, whereas these British kids are already, by the time someone like, Paul Simon is learning to play the guitar, the Beatles are already in Hamburg. So although they're the same generation, our kids are that little bit ahead, and that's what makes the British invasion possible. So skiffle is the nursery of the British invasion.
It's interesting how, again, things that we think seem spontaneous have these strange origins. Yeah. One of the great things about Motown was that a lot of those kids went to pre-integration schools where they had great music classes. Yeah. Like a lot of them went to Northern in Detroit, but they had music teachers who were teaching them counterpoint and teaching them, notation, and teaching them classical music. So Barrett Strong, a lot of those guys, Norman Whitfield, when they showed up, they knew music.
Very smart. Yeah, they could arrange.
And so we tend to think of, music as some sort of primordial scream. It's like, no.
A bit more than that.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with more from Billy Bragg after the break. We're back with more from Billy Bragg.
Speaking of guitars, I thought I read that you started writing songs before you played an instrument.
It's true, I did, yeah. Yeah.
What were you writing to? Were you writing to a tune in your head?
In my head, yeah, tunes in my head, yeah. I've got notebooks full of songs where I still could look at the lyric and remember what the tune was.
Really?
Oh, yeah, yeah. When I was 12, I wrote a poem at school, and the teacher wrote to my parents to ask if I'd copied it from a book. And when they found out I hadn't, then they got me to read it out on the Radio London, the local radio station. And I took that as a kind of recognition that I could do this. I could be a songwriter. I thought, this is really good. I don't know anyone else who's ever done this. So I started, just writing sort of songs that were broadly imitative of the music that I was into, which was American singer-songwriters and Tamla Motown. They're the two things that I listened to most at that age.
Do you remember, what was the first song that, do you remember, just moved you musically? Do you remember?
It's The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I heard it on a school trip in, I must have been 11 years old, so that would be 69. We were on a school trip somewhere. And it was one of those moments where I don't know, somehow it was on the radio, on the bus, on the trip. And it was I don't say this lightly, but it was a transcendental moment for an 11-year-old. It took me out of my little world into a completely different world. And something magical in it, the storytelling, the sound of it. And I kind of started really, I must have been really into music because my parents, that following Christmas, brought me a reel-to-reel tape recorder so I could record songs on the radio, so they wouldn't have to buy me records, basically, which is smart. And if I lugged this round the corner to my mate's house, his sister, Leslie, who was probably 15 at the time, older than us, but she had a brilliant record collection. She had quite a few Simon and Garfunkel records and several Motown Chartbuster compilations. And I more or less taped Leslie Chalmers' record collection, and that served me my apprentice. I then started trying to write songs like Paul Simon and Smokey Robinson, and still do some days.
Older siblings with good taste are a crucial part of the music.
Except I never had one. I never had an older sibling of good or bad taste, so I was kind of blind until my friends' older sisters, because basically when I worked my way through them, I got all the Simon and Garfunkel albums, because Simon and Garfunkel were very popular among winsome young, adolescent schoolgirls at the time, Sound of Silence and all that kind of stuff, And the Chartbuster albums were massive as well at the time. So that kind of brought me into the whole notion of the craft of songwriting. I would take songs apart. Think about Tracks of My Tears. It's 3 chords. It's possibly the greatest 3-chord trick of all time,
It's funny you mentioned the sound of the Boxer, because when we did the project with him, you wonder, what is it? Is it the words that move you? Is it the music? For him, it's all the sound.
Yeah.
And he obsesses over production.
Yeah.
And even now, if you've listened to that whole record, it's a stunning sounding record.
It is. It's an incredible album to be obsessed with, which I was for a long time. I was obsessed with that record. It kind of, the thing about, I eventually ended up becoming obsessed with Bob Dylan subsequently. Kind of Paul Simon led me into Bob Dylan and English folk music as well via Scarborough Fair, in a rather ironic way, because Martin Carthy, who Paul Simon was inspired by hearing Martin play Scarborough Fair to record his own version, was playing in a folk club not a mile from my house around that time. But it took these two guys from Brooklyn recording this old English folk song to turn me on to my own folk music, which is a weird, paradoxical way. What goes around comes around, we say in folk music.
So your musical inspirations were?
Paul Simon, Smokey Robinson, Eddie Cochran.
And what were your lyrical inspirations?
Well, again, I was trying to write knock-off, singer-songwriter songs. So a bit of Paul Simon to start with, a bit of Bob Dylan, a bit of Jackson Browne. I was big on Jackson Browne. I still think he's a great songwriter. And, I think you when you're learning your craft, you're always writing songs that in some ways have their framework from music you like. I always say to people, if they want to start writing songs, take your favourite song, take the words out of it and write your own words, because it's your favourite song. You'll know exactly how the words are supposed to fit. And then that's how, make your own words, maybe keep the chorus and, change the words to "I will always love you" to give it a happy ending or something, whatever you want to do. That's how you start to do it. That's what I did, basically. You just take a Chuck Berry song apart, and that's the most simplest thing, and then put your own words on it. And then eventually, when I was about 20, I suppose, maybe 21, I wrote a Billy Bragg song. I wrote a song that didn't have...
What was the first Billy Bragg song?
Richard, which ended up on the first album, because I was very proud of it, because it didn't sound like anybody else. I thought, this is actually me in this song. And once I'd worked out how to do that, this was towards the end of the period when I was in a little band called Riff Raff, which is kind of like a punky, new wavy band in the 70s, late 70s. And I started writing songs that had more of me in them. I worked out how to get me into the songs.
I also read somewhere that you were bullied as a kid. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. I was sort of, it got a bit, towards the end of our school years, it all got a bit leery at school. So I tended to not go in so much. It was too much grief. It just made me, gave me a lot of anxiety around town. So, the sort of things that other kids my age did, like go out to the pubs and go out dancing and stuff, I just didn't, it just gave me too much anxiety. So I was fortunate. I had a couple of mates who had a guitar and a drum kit, and we sat in my mum's back room and wrote songs and played music. It sort of saved my life.
Is that when you started guitar?
Yeah.
Did that give you some confidence?
A lot, yeah. A lot. A huge amount. Self-expression, Bruce. You're writing it, you're putting it all out there, this is how I feel. Music is a form of therapy. Whether you're listening to it or writing it or making it or playing it, it has a therapeutic effect, because you're putting yourself into it. And I say this not just as a musician, but that can also be as a listener, because I think the currency of music is fundamentally empathy. As a writer, you're asking the listener to listen to this person in this situation and feel something for them in a situation you might not have experienced as a person, but this person here, listen to that. Or there's another way whereby the person who's written the song has somehow touched a nerve with you. And in that case, you draw empathy from the song. You're getting some yourself. You're feeling that you're not alone. This song, is somehow articulating something you can't put into words. We all have songs like that. And that's really, really valuable, because I think, the sense of isolation that we have in society, which has always been there. It's not just a manifestation of the digital age. It's always been there. And when people come together to celebrate and to sing, whether it's in church, at soccer games, it happens, people sing, obviously at music concerts, you get a moment where you feel you're not alone. You're not the only person who cares about this thing, whatever this thing is.
Did you need the feedback of an audience to feel that way about your own songs, or did you feel that way in the back room of the house?
I felt that way in the back room of the house.
Really?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
You felt anxiety about being around other people, and yet you could put your feelings out in a song?
Yeah,
I would think that would be hard.
Yeah. I could. No, I don't think so. I mean, that's the trick of it, isn't it? You learn to put into song the things that you find yourself struggling with. They're a reflection of who you are. And you think the song's about somebody else, but actually it turns out to be about you, actually, when you admit about it. And that, when we started doing gigs, when punk happened and it became possible for you just to turn up and play, it became much easier. You didn't have to justify being in a band. Everyone was in a band. Then there was a confidence in that as well, because it was like our generation were coming to the fore now. This is who we are. My political awakening was going to Rock Against Racism. That's the first political thing I ever did. And that was an incredible experience, because it gave me the courage of my convictions,
That's interesting to me. I had always assumed that your politics informed you becoming a singer and a songwriter, that you're what we would call here a red diaper baby.
No. The town I grew up in East London has always been Labour since my father was a kid. So there was no real politics around. It was just Labour. That was what it was, and everyone was Labour. My parents weren't particularly political. I got my sense of politics by osmosis from listening to predominantly American soul music from the civil rights period. You know, if you get them Motown Chartbusters albums, they're great pop albums, and they're amazing. And then you get to volume 5, I think, and all of a sudden something's changed. You get, Ball of Confusion by the Temptations. You got War by Edwin Starr, and there's a change of tone. Something's happened, and the clue is in the record. Marvin Gaye sings Abraham, Martin and John, and what has happened is Dr. King has been murdered, and along with the rest of African-American culture, Motown's reflecting that. So I kind of picked up on that politics, the politics of civil rights. And I was also there in the singer-songwriters that I listened to as well, the early Dylan records. A huge record for me was The Times They Are Changing, that album.
Right.
I swapped it with a mate of mine at school for his dad's copy of, I got his dad's copy of The Times They Are Changing in exchange for my copy of the Jackson 5's Greatest Hits. It was a brilliant deal. And
I think you both won on that one. But
he wanted to give it to his sister as a birthday present. So anyway, we did it. It just blew my mind. It was so raw. It was so visceral, that album, The Times They Are Changing. And that Bob Dylan, not the later Blonde on Blonde type Iowa 61 Dylan, but that early, Blowing in the Wind Bob Dylan was really inspiration to me as well. I'm talking about when I'm like 14, 15 now. So I got my politics from that, but my politics were broadly, I suppose, humanitarian. But where I was, when I went to Rock Against Racism, I was working in an office in London, and the men that I worked with were, casually racist, casually sexist, casually homophobic, and I really, didn't ever say anything or raise any questions. But going to Rock Against Racism, see the Clash were playing, and that's kind of what got us to go over the step. But going there and getting to there was a park in Hackney called Victoria Park where it happened, and seeing 80,000 kids just like me, I kind of realised that this issue is going to be what defines my generation. Like Vietnam had defined the previous generation, we were going to define ourselves in opposition to discrimination of all kinds. Not just racism, but homophobia and sexism and everything else. We were going to be the generation of two-tone. We were going to be the generation of artists against apartheid. That's who we were going to be. And when I went back to work on Monday, the world hadn't changed, but my perception of it had. And I knew why I was different from these arseholes at work, And so I'd stopped laughing when they made those comments. I stopped joining in.
Right.
With, pestering the secretaries and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, there's something different now, And that informs how I understand how music works when I'm doing a gig.
Now, that's interesting to me because you, of course, are always called a political songwriter, although the vast majority of your songs are about love and human relationships and other things. Does a song have to be explicitly political to be political?
No. It really, really doesn't. I have a song called I Keep Faith, and I can introduce that as a love song. Ostensibly, it works as a love song, but I can also introduce it by talking about my faith in the audience's ability to change the world. And if I do that, men cry. They come up to me at the end and say, I really moved, I was really moved by that. And I'm like, good, mate, I was talking about empathy back there. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that empathy. Your mate Malcolm, I was listening to him on the radio one time, and he talked about the ability to move people to tears without hurting them. The ability to move people by emotion to tears is a very powerful thing. And then he played Levi Stubbs' Tears. That made my ears prick up, I tell you. And it was very insightful, Malcolm, to touch on that, because it gave me a sudden flash of how the process works.
I would say a couple of things. First of all, I always felt that song was quite ironic. Not that you don't like Levi Stubbs, but that the comparison of her life with a sort of Motown fantasy was quite bleak.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, the song is about the redemptive power of soul music. The pain that Levi Stubbs has the pain that he expresses, the tear in his voice, the sob in his voice, she draws from that a sense that someone understands where she's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
She draws some empathy from his pain. His pain somehow is her pain. She's got to pick herself up and put herself back together again now.
Right.
And Levi's obviously felt that as well, because you can hear it in the way that he sings, you know, when he cries out for Bernadette. You know, when he talks about the 7 rooms of gloom,
mm-hmm.
you know, it's there, you know.
They're very operatic, those songs, yeah.
What, just incredible voice, incredible voice.
Are you the person who's jotting things down when a line occurs to you? Is it something you're very conscious of injecting into your records?
I think if you're going to do politics, you have to leaven it up a little with some wry humour. You know, you can't just go storming in there, prodding people in the chest all the way through a gig. I do a little bit of that, you know, mm-hmm. sometimes. Talking about the election on this tour, I'll be doing a little bit of finger pointing maybe.
Of the British election?
The American election in November.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The British election I will talk about, but obviously, you know, what's coming in November is very contentious at the moment, so I'll doubtless be talking about that.
I haven't been reading about it, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
But I found when I was, you know, my political crucible was the UK miners' strike in 1984. And I did
you played there?
Yeah, loads of times, yeah. I would play
Can you tell, what was that like?
I was mad. I was absolutely mad.
Well, did they know you were coming? You would just show up and.
Well, I used to go up to the coalfields because I was solo, so I literally would go around with a small amp, a little 60-watt amp, and a guitar.
What was your guitar back then?
Oh, it was a copy of a Gibson Les Paul made by a company called Arbiter. Mm-hmm. It was a sort of one. It was my punk guitar.
Right. How many? You're not one of those guys with a lot of guitars,
no,
are you?
I'm not. No, I'm not really. No.
Because Johnny Marr has.
Yeah.
Endless.
I did a gig once with Steve Earle in Montreal, and he was opening for me. He had 12 guitars. He couldn't get on stage. I was like, I had like a guitar shop.
You're
in
only
the wings.
doing 8 songs.
Yeah, exactly. It was. Anyway, so I'm not that guy. No. I carry a couple of guitars. I've probably got at home not more than half a dozen knocking around.
And you know, when I would first see you play, you would play what are called cowboy chords.
Yeah.
Open chords, but you'd strum the whole thing, which nobody does.
Yeah, well, I'm basically a rhythm guitar player in a punk band. That's what I basically am. I'm not a lead guitar player. I never was a lead guitar player. I'm a rhythm guitar player. And I think I'm pretty good at that. But it's very percussive. You know, the guitar heroes that I have are people like Ry Cooder and Ronnie Wood and they're John Lee Hooker. Their guitar style is pretty percussive. It's about the rhythm, you know. So that's where I get my licks from, get my ideas from.
I don't know how we got in that, but no, I was asking, what was it like to...
In the miners' strike, yeah. Well, first of all, it was amazing to see because the audiences would be my generation, but the people who were making the speeches at the gigs to when they put round the bucket to raise a bit more money would often be the wives of the miners. So these were women who were perhaps 10 or 15 years older, sometimes 20 years older than the audience, working class women who probably never spoke in public before, talking to all these little punk rockers. It was an amazing thing to see because their husbands were either on the picket line or in prison.
Right.
That in itself was amazing to watch.
But this is early 80s.
Yeah, 1984.
It's almost all coal mining.
Yeah, it's all coal mining, yeah.
Right.
It's predominantly in the north of England, South Wales, some in Scotland, some in Kent, but predominantly the north of England and South Wales. Heavy working class areas. You know, villages where the pit is absolutely everything, you know, the whole village. And they're like under siege from the police and the state. And you would go up there and the audiences were really, really up for it. And it was just incredibly invigorating. And then you'd very often be kipping on their sofa or in their spare room. Mm-hmm. You know, you go back and, you go back to their house and make you a cup of tea, maybe a bacon sandwich. And then they sit down and talk politics because they wanted to know why a pop star from London was doing this. Is it just for the fame or do you actually walk the walk and talk the talk? So very quickly I had to sort of, because I left school when I was 16, so I didn't have a political education. I had to sort of learn the language of Marxism to be able to put across my ideas and define where I was coming from. And that was a real sharp learning curve. But, it was a genuine, radical, situation. It was class war. It's my class against the state, really. So I couldn't not take part. And also I'd listened to all these solo singer-songwriters from the 1960s trying to change the world through music. And now I had an opportunity to see if you can actually change the world. Does it actually work, this? Can you go and sing songs and bring about social change? Because that's what the Clash told me you could. Music would change the world, and I kind of believed that. Now I had a chance to find out if that was true or not. And it turns out it's not.
Was that a hard lesson?
Initially, maybe, I suppose. But thinking about it, logically, music has no agency. It's not going to win the election. It has the ability to bring people together. And that in and of itself is a positive thing, because change happens, I think, is catalyzed by two events. Firstly, your realization that things are not right.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, your realization that other people have already realized that things are not right. You realize you're not the only person who cares about this thing. And music can bring you together into an audience where you suddenly realize that. You're like, okay. Like, as me, Rock Against Racism, I speak from experience here. That's what happened to me in Victoria Park in Hackney. I realised I wasn't the only person who cared about these things. When I make my pitch for solidarity with the trans community, when I sing sexuality on these shows, there will undoubtedly be people my age, because my audience is predominantly my age, in 60s, who probably haven't given the issue much thought. It's not that they're anti or pro or anything. It's just something like they're like, it's too much trouble. But they see themselves in an audience who are expressing solidarity with this, who are responding positively to what I'm saying. And they look around them and they think, well, maybe I should get off the fence on this. Maybe have a think about what's going on here, because clearly this is an important issue to these people who I have so much in common with. Mm-hmm. And that's how music can affect change. Not directly, not storm the barricades way, but just by planting ideas in people's minds, introducing them to different concepts, challenging their perceptions. Music, that's one of the things that music can do. It doesn't have to do it all the time. It's not the defining aspect of it, but it's one of the many things it can do. And I think coming from a 20th century music culture in which music was our social medium, which had to articulate everything that my generation thought through music, and we had, 3-4 weekly music papers in the UK to thrash these ideas out. The idea that music should be something more than I'm great, you're shit, you like my socks, to paraphrase Oasis, is still important to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if younger people feel that way. It's not something that I'm going to say, listen, this is the way it should be. It's not my job to do that. I hear young people writing songs about the pressure that they feel under. That's enough for me. That they are talking about that. They are using music to articulate their feelings about that. I'm not going to start leaning on them and say, why don't you write about trade unions? I'm not going to write that, because they've not been through the miners' strike. Mm-hmm. They've had a different cultural perception, cultural experience to the one I've had.
After this last break, we'll be back with the rest of Bruce Headlam's conversation with Billy Bragg. Here's the rest of our conversation with Billy Bragg.
The album with Trust, Tank Park Salute, pardon me.
Don't try this at home.
It was I thought, are you saying that about me trying to say Tank Park Salute? No. I thought that's what you said. Don't try this at home. It was much more, a bigger musical palette.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Did you like that? Because people are like, oh, finally, Billy Bragg has discovered the 80s.
Well, that was about being doctrinaire as well in some ways,
But there, when I think of the song, Everywhere, Cindy of 1,000 Lives, very different sounds.
Yeah. Well, you got to progress, haven't you? One, that's one thing. But what happened was I wrote Sexuality, and it kind of sounded like Louie Louie, and Johnny Marr got hold of it and made that track that you now hear, and it was a shining pop monstrosity. And when it came back, me and my producer Grant Showbiz were like, oh damn, now we're going to have to make the album that sits on. But it was good. It was a challenge, and coming as it did. I think if you're really, really lucky, you get 10 good years where people are interested in what you're doing, and you can feel that when you do something, the media will be, give you a front page and stuff like that. If you get 10 years, you're really, really lucky, and that comes at the end of kind of that period. where I was able, it got me on top of the pops. Everybody at home thinks it was a huge hit record, which actually only got to number 26 in the charts. But, the perception of it is that's what it was.
Yeah. If you're going to sell out, you got to get to the top 10.
Yeah, exactly. And consequently, after that record, I had a grumbly appendix. I was off the road for a while, and I got together with my partner, and we became parents and everything changed. So, but it was also an aspect of that where I kind of painted myself into a corner because I can't really be a big production pop star. That's not really who I am. I can do it. You want me to do it? Hey, here we go. I can do it. Check out this City of a Thousand Lives. This is a song about an American photographer that you've never heard of who does incredible images that are all of herself. Here it is. Check
Cindy
it out.
Sherman.
Yeah, Cindy Sherman, the great Cindy Sherman. And so, yeah, I was incredibly, and still am, incredibly proud of that record. But I couldn't carry on a natural trajectory. It was sort of like, it wasn't me. So fortunately, then I made William Bloke, which was a much more personal record, much more a post-parenthood record, which I'm very proud of as well. And
I do want to ask you about Tank Park Salute, though.
Sure. Tank Park Salute was had a very strange genesis. Let's start by saying that when I was 18, my father died of lung cancer. He was 52 years old. The hospital, when he got ill, told us the best way to deal with this would be not to talk about it. Not to talk about it in front of him and not to talk about it among ourselves. So
I have to stop you there because that is so English.
I know. It's terrible, isn't it? But it's also so my father's generation. And looking back now, it was a mistake. My mother really regretted it. She really regretted it till the day she died. When she got cancer and I went to see her in the hospital, she said to me, "We're going to talk about this." And I'm like, "We are, Mum. Of course we are. We are." She hated it. My father had every opportunity to say to me, "Son, I think I'm dying. Look, I'm coughing up blood. Look, I'm dying." He never did. He never said it. So I don't know. My brother, who's 5 years younger than me, he was at school at the time, and I was there when my father died. My brother's never asked me about it. And I respect that. I'm not going to suddenly turn up and say to him, "Listen, I'm going to tell you what happened that day." If he doesn't want to know, he doesn't want to know. And I respect that. But I was in a very weird situation where I never spoke to it about anybody either. I spoke to the what happened to anybody. And then one day I was writing a song and a line came out. I closed my eyes and when I looked, your name was in the memorial book. And now where my father's ashes are scattered, they have a book there on the anniversary of the day of his death, which opens on the page and his name's there. And I used to go to it with my mum on the anniversary and look at the book and go and visit. That's what we did. And this line, I was like, "Ooh, now this is interesting. If I go down this path, I'm going to be in a situation where I have to talk to strangers about what happened. How do I feel about that?" I wasn't really sure how I felt about that, but nonetheless, I wrote that song in the next hour. It just came out, vroom, there it was, fully formed around that. I already had that guitar lick. That's what I was writing the other song to, that guitar lick. Oh, so the next time I was rehearsing with my keyboard player, Cara Tivy, I taught her the piano part, played her the song. She said, "Oh, that's about your dad, isn't it?" I was like, "Yeah, it is, Cara, yeah." So I thought, well, if she can get it like that, obviously it hits the mark. So I started playing it live and it had that effect. People would come and talk to me about someone that they had lost and still do. People write to me and say, your song really helped me to process things about my father or whoever lost. And it's great to be able to write back to them and say, "You know what, mate, it had exactly the same effect on me. It helped me to process how I felt about the loss of my father to the extent that I can now talk about it without being overcome with emotion." And so, I'm really pleased to have a song about that. My mum, whenever I played in London or where she came to see me play, she would always say beforehand, you're going to play that song, aren't you? I don't think she even knew what it was called. You're going to play that song. And I would play the song. Of course I would play the song nervously while she was there, so self-consciously. And then my nephews would say to me, why do you keep playing that song that makes Nan cry every time we come and see you? And I'd be like, boys, ask your Nan, all right? Your Nan will tell you. Ask your Nan. Yeah.
I have to say, and this is inappropriate, but the comic version of the English "We're not talking about it" is, and it is my favorite line in Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
When they're talking about one of the drummers dying.
Yeah.
And the phrase, he said, the police said, best left unsolved.
Yeah.
It's the most English line in that whole thing.
Yeah.
Is that how songs come to you, a phrase or two, and then that opens up the idea? You mentioned you wrote a song about, I had no idea Cindy of 1,000 Lives was about Cindy Sherman.
Oh, yeah. Cindy Sherman was a big part of my realization of America on that first trip. I bought loads of postcards to send home, but then I just started buying postcards that just had images. You could get a postcard with James Brown on it. You get a postcard with, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. And I found there's a famous Cindy Sherman photograph of like a child with a pig's head eating an apple. And it was so weird. It was so weird. I saw it and I bought it and I thought, what the heck is this? What madness? What strange weirdness. I mean, America's a weird enough place if you've never been here before. But that's, to me, summed up the weirdness of America. And I subsequently found out what it was and who she was. And I bought, coming to the US back and forth in the 80s, I was able to find, books about her, exhibitions and stuff. And it always intrigued me what she was doing. That, putting herself in the absolutely in the art as a songwriter, that's something that you try and do. You try and put yourself in there, even subconsciously. Sometimes you don't realize you're doing it, putting yourself in there. So I was very much attracted to that. And when I got those weird chords, the song kind of sort of developed out of that, going back to those, I think, do they call them murder pictures? Kind of like weird, scary period she went through, which I think comes after the original sort of like cinema scenes, untitled pictures. That I really, there's something about the United States of America that's very strange to people coming from my country, is the vastness of it and the fact most of it isn't inhabited. What Springsteen referred to as the darkness on the edge of town. We don't have much of that in my country. You might have the darkness on the edge of town, but you can probably see another town just up the ways a bit. You don't have that bit where the town ends and there's the piney woods. And the piney woods go on for miles and miles and miles. When you're flying in over New Jersey sometimes, it's piney woods, and then, whoa, there's New York. It's that it's like the moors around Manchester. Right. They kind of stand around. And as a European, you get that weird in the pines thing. And those Cindy Sherman postcards from that period of her art really spoke to me about that, what's out there in the majority of, on any given night, the majority of the United States of America is in complete and utter darkness. That's a weird thing to someone coming from a little island off the coast of Europe.
Have you met her?
No, I've never met her. But weirdly, she was interviewed in the Guardian last month, and I was. It's always great to read about what she's doing and see what she's up to. I don't know if she has an exhibition. And then the very last paragraph, the journalist asked her if she'd ever heard the song, and she said no. She was very flattered by it. Particularly as I've never met him. As if I'd need to meet her to be able to write a song like that, because I don't really need...
Yeah, you're an artist. Yeah.
I mean, it's there. I mean, it's about how what she did moved me, and I'm responding to that. So it'd be lovely to meet her, but whether that would help me understand better anything that she's done, probably not. Sometimes it's lovely to know that she's flattered by it, because sometimes, people don't want the attention, but I've huge respect for someone who can have a vision like that and communicate it so powerfully.
Now, I should ask you, I've never heard you talk about Springsteen. You just mentioned him. Are you a fan of Springsteen?
A huge fan.
Oh,
Huge
okay.
fan.
I didn't know that.
Huge fan. He has that redemptive power as well, like soul music. You know, whatever happens to the characters in his song, there's always the possibility that they can ride to the sea and wash these sins off their hands, you know, as they do in Racing in the Street. Mm-hmm. I mean, Darkness on the Edge of Town, we were just talking about that. You know, I mean, is there any greater opening line in pop music than They Blew Up the Chicken Man in Philly last night? I mean, what a great line that is.
That is a great line.
It's such a great line. I saw him at Meadowlands on the Born in the USA tour. Mm-hmm. Blew my mind. He made it feel like a club. Just did my head in completely. It was like, I mean, the trouble is, I think maybe it's just, I don't know, it might just be me, maybe all performers are like this, but when you go and see a songwriter or, you know, just someone who does a job similar to your job, you spend all your time analysing what they're doing, how they're doing that, why they're doing that, what's going on there, you know. Yeah. It gets in the way of watching Elvis Costello. It's impossible for me to enjoy a Bob Dylan gig. I'm trying to all the time think, you know, what's going on here? But Springsteen was just like,
I think he's so connected to the audience. Yep. There's no, like, I was used to English bands or kind of nodding at each other somewhat ironically. Yep. There's none of that.
No. He's all there in it. He doesn't leave anything. He doesn't leave anything backstage. It's all there out front. You get it every time. And he just gives and gives and gives.
Yeah. After you did William Bloke, you did the first Mermaid Avenue.
Yeah.
And I think people know the sort of genesis of the project, that you got all these lyrics of Woody Guthrie. When you saw these archives, what surprised you? What jumped out?
How much there was. 3,000 complete lyrics. Boxes and boxes. You start off pulling out the songs you think are good and you realise actually there's amazing songs in there, and you pull out the amazing ones and you realise there are brilliant songs in there, and you have to go back and put some back in the box they come out of, and you realise that, and then you get on a thread, and then you realise you get a bit of paper and it's got written on the bit of paper, you know, there's a song here, but at the top of the bit of paper, Woody's written way over yonder in the minor key. You're like, what is that? What does that mean? And you go through more and you see it again, you know, way over yonder in the minor key, and maybe a little bit more of a scribble lyric. And eventually you come to a song that's got way over yonder in the minor key in the chorus, and you realise he's left you a paper trail to kind of somehow to find and connect with his song.
I think as a listener, what surprised me the most was how modern the songs sounded, because I'm not a Woody Guthrie aficionado. He, I think to many people, just seemed like a character from The Grapes of Wrath. He's this sort of sepia-toned hobo crossing the country.
Of course.
And so the songs were so funny, which surprised me, but not funny in the way that, you know, Christ for President or some of the kids' songs were, Walt Whitman's Niece.
Yeah. That's why we opened with it. So everyone knew where we were going. Don't think you're going to get the Dust Bowl ballads here, mate. This is...
Well, that's what
there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, Nora Guthrie, Woody's daughter, who was running the archive at the time, who asked me to come and look at the lyrics, she was concerned that this is like the late 90s. Her father was becoming a bit of a two-dimensional figure who, you know, was kind of up on a pedestal as the Dust Bowl balladeer. And she rightly pointed out that he actually lived half his life in New York City, down on Coney Island, at a time when New York City was perhaps the most exciting cultural city in the world. You know, from 1939 until he died in 1967, he was here in New York. So she wanted that aspect of him to come out. You know, everyone had heard the Dust Bowl. There was one song early on, because Woody often wrote the tunes to traditional tunes. There was one song called My 30,000 that was clearly, because the opening line was written to the tune of an old American folk song called Jesse James. Jesse James was the man, his children, they were brave, that tune. And I very proudly, when I'd got my first stuff, played it to her and said, yeah, look, I've got and she was like, yeah, we've got plenty of songs like that, Billy. I was like, oh, okay. You want me to? And she was throwing songs at me that were, you know, totally contrary to people's perception of Woody Guthrie. And it was her generosity and encouragement that led me to choose songs like Ingrid Bergman, where he talks about making love to the Swedish film star on the slopes of an Italian volcano. My Flying Saucer, where he goes for a ride on a flying saucer, not things you would think about Woody Guthrie, but to take Woody on board. I mean, you mentioned The Grapes of Wrath, the movie, Henry Fonda in The Grapes of Wrath. Perhaps in people's mind, they associate Woody with that sepia tone period. But yeah, he was there. He did write songs in there, but he also lived in New York in the 40s. So you also have to imagine him in the movie On the Town with Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly, the two sailors who are chasing women around New York City in 1940 in Technicolor, in full color, which incidentally ends in Coney Island. They chase the girls to the Coney Island Fun Fair. Woody lived in that world. He wrote many of those songs in that world. That's why Nora chose to call the album Mermaid Avenue, because to focus on that world. So we were out to challenge people's perceptions, to, as Nora said, to reboot her father's image. And that's why we kicked off with Walt Whitman's niece. So nobody would have any preconceptions of we were going to be reverent with the little guy. That's not what Nora asked us to do. She asked us to shake him up. And with regard to it sounding modern, there wasn't many templates for doing a project like that. But Jeff and I think at the time, Grail Marcus' book, Invisible Republic, had come out about the recording of the Basement tapes. And I certainly read it. I know Jeff had read it as well. And I said to him, well, look, this is a bit like the Basement tapes in the sense that, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with, many of the songs in the Basement tapes were old-timey songs. They weren't all Bob Dylan songs that Bob had written. A lot of the songs they played were old folk songs they were messing around with. And I said to Jeff, this is kind of what we're doing. We're kind of messing around with these old songs. But the thing about the Basement tapes, you knew that although they were playing these old-timey songs, the people that were playing them had heard Little Richard. They'd heard rock and roll. They were in that vernacular. So we got to make these records, and people got to know that we have heard The Clash. People got to know that we've heard Cheap Trick. The Wilcos were big Cheap Trick fans. I'm like, yeah, bring it on. Bring it on. We've got a opportunity here to take these songs and kind of like dress them up anyway. It's like going to the dressing up box every day. And who are we going to be today? Let's be Tom Waits today on Meanest Man, Let's be Vanilla Fudge. Let's be, let's just be weird. Let's just take these songs apart and put them back together again in a different way. And the freedom to do that is why we ended up recording 53 tracks rather than 15 tracks, which we were contracted to do. Not least because we were in Dublin. We invited Nora over for a holiday for a week, and she bought another sheaf of songs and started the old bloody process of again.
Right.
Yeah. She suddenly turned up with, Another Man's Done Gone. What an incredible song that is. So, and it was a joy to do. I mean, I really enjoyed the whole process because hitherto I'd been the guy in the studio where everything had to go through me. We had, every decision. What song's next? How do you want to record it? When are we having a tea break? What biscuits are we having? Everything. Whereas in that process, it was a two-hander, if not a three-hander, with Jay Bennett as well, between me, Jeff, and Jay, and the band. We were taking it in turns. It was what we're going to do next.
Did it change your writing afterwards?
It did, yeah, it did. Because one of the things I realised looking through Woody's work is that, and he said as much in his writings, that, he never wrote a cynical song in his life. He never wrote a song that put people down. I think that's where I kind of started to understand what a corrosive thing cynicism is. If Woody famously had on his guitar, "This machine kills fascists." If I had to have something written on my guitar, it would be "Death to cynicism." And by cynicism, I don't mean skepticism. I think that's healthy. It's helpful. I don't mean doubt. Never trust anyone who has no doubts. I'm talking about those people who have given up and they want you to give up as well. It makes them feel better about the decision they've made. I have no time for those people, To me, cynicism is what makes you think nothing will ever change. Cynicism is what makes you fear that nobody else cares about this stuff. It's what Fox News want you to believe. And I'm, like Woody, I'm, committed to destroying that that feeling in people and kicking it to the curb as often as I can. Not to say that I'm not prone to my own cynicism. How could you not be? The way politics have gone in the last 30 years. But you have to fight it all the time in order to recognise that the glass is half full, and that if ordinary people are given the opportunity to pull the levers of power, we would live in a better world. You have to believe in people and what they do.
I want to ask you about 2 projects you did, because it was with one of our favorite people here. It was Joe Henry.
Oh, yeah.
And first of all, and this gets to the sense of place, the field recordings, you taped train songs from, where was the?
Chicago to Los Angeles.
Chicago to Los Angeles, and you taped, I don't know how many you taped, there's about 10 on the record.
Yeah, I think there's a dozen, I think.
What was how did that come about?
Well, it's a bit convoluted, but I'll try. While I was writing the Skiffle book, I was in touch by Aperture photography magazine, and they wanted to send me out on the road. It was the anniversary of the Americans, the photo book by
Robert Frank.
Thank you very much, Robert Frank. I'm so bad with names. I do apologise to everyone. Robert Frank's great book, The Americans, which is an amazing photography book. They wanted to send someone out on the road. A photographer out on the road with me, and so I had a chat with them, and I said, it's really boring being on the road. Really, I'm just like, I'm in the van and I'm at a gig, and I said, can't we do it would be more interested to do a road trip somewhere where I've never been in America. And they said, well, where would you like to go in America that you've never been? I said, I'd like to go to Rock Island, where the Rock Island line comes from. And the guy said to me, where's that? I said, I don't know. It turns out it's in the far west of Illinois, on the border with Iowa. It's Mississippi. The Mississippi divides, and it's where they built the first bridge across the Mississippi. So we went there. And we drove down to Arkansas, where the song Rock Island Line comes from. And when we went to the railway station there, we wanted to get the midnight train to come in so we could do a photo with the midnight train. And it come in, and it sat there for 40 minutes, just sat there. And what's that about? And it turns out that there are so few passenger trains outside the northeast corner that when a passenger train, like one a day really, on that line through Little Rock where we were, they have to stay in the railway station to let the freight trains through. They use the railway station almost like a siding. And it turned out, I got the schedule, and it turned out it stopped in every big city 40 minutes. And it occurred to me that you could use that time to record a song. You get off the train, go into the waiting room, find a suitably acoustic corner, play a train song, jump back on the train. And keep going, play some on the train maybe, And so Joe Henry had produced my album before that, Tooth and Nail, and he's a dear friend of mine, Joe. I love him to bits. And I came up with this cockamamie idea, and he said, yeah, that'd be brilliant. So over the course of 3 or 4 days, we were on the train, and it was a revelation, because the train comes through the kind of, what was it, Iggy Pop called it, the ripped back sides of the city, because you're slowing down to go over roads.
Yeah.
You're slowing down to go over roads, and you're looking in someone's backyard, in their parlour. You can see them all sitting there having a dinner. It's an America I certainly never seen, and my compadres who were working with me, Joe and the guy who recorded it, and the guys who took some photos and did some filming, they were blown away by this. They'd never been on a train before, I don't think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really strange. They were like, wow, this is like a completely different. It kind of comes down from Chicago, comes down to San Antonio, and then it kind of follows the Rio Grande, and then off across Arizona into Union Station in Los Angeles. And we had the best time. The trains had, they have a shower on there. We have a dining car, and they always sit you on a table with people that you haven't sat with before. So that's always someone new. And who's on the trains? The people on the trains are either tourists, people who worked on the railways or their father worked on the railways, and people who don't want to show their ID at an airport. or on trains. So it's a really interesting trip when you sit down and talk to people at the table, you know, what you're doing and where you are. And you know, we learn a lot.
Was it easy to find places in the train stations where you could get good acoustics?
Yeah, generally, yeah. We told the crew that what we were doing. Well, I had a contact at Amtrak who was a musician, really fortunate, and he set it up for me. We met him in Union Station in Chicago. So they have all aboard. They have 3 all aboards. The first all aboard is a general all aboard. The second all aboard is better get aboard, and then the last all aboard is goodbye. So we just had to listen out for the second all aboard and make sure we were on our way back to the train so we didn't get left behind. Mm-hmm. One of the things about Amtrak is their schedule's a bit hit and miss. Yeah. One of the guys, an English guy, said that they got in 24 hours late to Union, and it's only a 48-hour train journey. They got in a whole day late due to problems with freight trains on the line. Mm-hmm. And we were due to get into Union Station, Los Angeles at kind of 7 a.m. And we got in at 4 a.m. And the one time ever they were early, we got in at 4 a.m. But it was cool because we ended up finding we found this lovely space to record our last song, which was Early Morning Rain by Gordon Lightfoot, which compares the jet plane to the railways. A brilliant, brilliant song. And where we sang it was behind us, there was a little garden square. And as we sang it, the birds began to wake up. They must have heard us, and they started singing, and you can hear them just in the background starting to sing in the bushes behind us as it's starting to get light. It was a brilliant, brilliant experience. And I encourage any of you out there who want to see a different kind of America to take a trip. There's another route to Los Angeles, goes through the Rockies, the California Zephyr. We went on the Texas Eagle. But it really is an amazing experience. And given the grief you have to go through airports to get around America, I don't know why there isn't a high-speed train link. You know, San Francisco to Los Angeles, a bullet train. You know, as the atmosphere gets more turbulent, the possibility of high-speed trains, I think you really should check it out, because it's the trains that make America. America before the trains is a completely different place to America after the train. And before the train, it was only really feasible to build settlements inland on rivers because you just couldn't get the stuff. There was too many piney woods in the way, So all the big towns and the big cities are all on the great rivers. Once the railway comes, then, it opens the whole continent up. And I don't think, doing the record and doing the research that went with it, I don't think there's ever been a more transformative technology for humankind than the railroad. The change it brings for thousands of years of nothing being able to go faster than a horse could gallop or a ship could sail, suddenly to have something that not could only go at a higher speed, but could connect you directly to anywhere in the continent, so that you could order something from Chicago and it would arrive 2 or 3 days later. It would physically be there. It's so much more revolutionary than the internet, what we've experienced in our lifetimes, which is in itself revolutionary. But, Amazon is nothing to the ability of people to order something from a catalogue out east and it end up in this tiny little town in wherever, Nevada or whatever, something like that. And also people could get on it. I mean, so many of those blues songs are about the railroad, because that was another level of emancipation for African Americans, to get to the big cities up north, where you weren't constantly, there was still racism and because there was still discrimination, but it wasn't the Jim Crow type up there. That emancipatory nature of the railroads in America that's why we wanted to take them songs back there.
It was also the way people told time back then.
Yeah.
You knew that was the 3:04.
In my country, that's when they had to synchronize all the clocks in the country, because beforehand they just did it when it got dark and when it got light. But once the railroad come, everything had to run on a scheduled timetable, and it's interesting. If you go back to the story that made Charles Dickens, the Pickwick Papers, it's about the pre-industrial age. It's why we Brits are all obsessed with Jane Austen It's all going back to that prelapsarian period before the Industrial Revolution, before the railroad came. There was this kind of, dizzying kind of Garden of Eden vibe with the aristocracy and all that kind of stuff. It's very interesting how the railroad comes to symbolize modernity and energy and dynamicism. And particularly in this continent, it changes everything.
Well, you woke up the birds in Los Angeles. It's a very Woody Guthrie image. I think we should end there. Thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been great chatting with you, man.
Thanks so much to Billy Bragg for stopping off during his tour to chat with Bruce Headlam. Here are playlists of some of our favorite Billy Bragg songs. Visit the link in our show notes or at brokenrecordpodcast.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Broken Record Pod. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced by Leah Rose with marketing help from Eric Sandler and Jordan McMillan. Our engineer is Ben Tolliday. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. And if you like this show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.